If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know where you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I've been in some strange places through this job: desert ghost towns, collapsed mining camps, one time even a commune that ran entirely off the grid. But nothing got under my skin like that forgotten county deep in the Appalachians. It wasn't on any recent maps. The locals called it Black Hollow. Not a real name, just something whispered when people wanted you to stop asking questions. I should have listened. It started with a report from the state, routine stuff on paper. They'd flagged a small, inactive county that hadn't filed a census, tax data, or utility usage in over 12 years. Black Hollow, tucked in the southwest corner of a much larger county, was technically still under state oversight. But no mail had gone there since 2006. The last recorded resident to file taxes had been a preacher named Ezekiel Marin, and that was over a decade ago. I was assigned to conduct a soft inspection, drive in, verify habitable structures, document signs of life, and come back. I packed light and left from Charleston, West Virginia, driving south until the roads narrowed and the hills closed in around me. The last 30 miles weren't even on Google Maps, just a red line on a paper topo map I picked up from a ranger station. No cell service, no traffic, just long stretches of mountain switchbacks and thick trees that made the sky feel claustrophobic. The sun was out, but everything felt dim, like the trees were swallowing the light. I reached the county line around 2:30 in the afternoon. There was a rusted road sign, half swallowed by vines, that simply read, "You are now entering." No name, no county seal, nothing else. Just that. I stopped to take a picture, but my phone camera app wouldn't open. I figured it was just a glitch or battery drain from the remote drive. I noted it in my logbook and continued on foot, leaving my car at a dead-end turnout that looked like it hadn't seen fresh tire tracks in years. Black Hollow didn't look like a town. It looked like something people had tried to erase. The homes were there, sure, single-level wooden cabins with sagging porches, broken glass, and the smell of old mildew leaking out from under door frames. But what threw me off was how intact they were. No graffiti, no signs of looting. It was like everyone had simply left, all at once, and the forest had waited politely to reclaim what was theirs. Inside one of the houses, I found children's toys laid out on a carpet, plastic soldiers in a perfect line. In another, the kitchen table was still set for breakfast, dust covering bowls of petrified cereal. The calendar on the wall read August 2008, and every date past the 13th was scratched out with a red pen. No markings, just a thick, angry red slash through each day. The further I walked, the less right everything felt. I didn't see a single animal. No dogs, no birds, not even bugs. It was dead silence, broken only by the creak of wood or wind through half-shut windows. I came across a post office next, doors slightly ajar, boxes still full of unopened mail. The most recent envelope I could find was addressed to Reverend Marin, dated August 11, 2008. That name again. I decided to find the church. It was uphill, beyond a grove of pines so dense the air felt refrigerated. The church was small, whitewashed, with a tilted steeple and a broken bell rope swaying gently despite the stillness. Its double doors were chained shut, but someone had left the back open. Inside, the pews were untouched. A pulpit stood at the front, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, circles within circles like some kind of old cipher. And behind the pulpit, nailed to the wall, was a series of black and white photos. Each one showed the same face, a gaunt man with sunken eyes and a long beard, always staring straight at the camera. In the last photo, his eyes were closed. Underneath was a single handwritten sentence: "He sleeps, so we may remain." I heard something then, a sound so subtle it might have been my own blood rushing in my ears. A slow, dragging scrape, like with sliding across stone. I turned, and one of the pews, an entire wooden pew, had shifted several inches backward. No footsteps. No breeze. Just movement. I stepped outside and noticed something worse. My car keys were missing. I always clipped them to my belt loop. Always. But they were gone, and so was the spare from my jacket pocket. I ran back down the path, retracing my steps to the turnout. The car was gone. Not moved. Not broken into. Gone. Just tire marks in the gravel leading nowhere. Like it had driven off by itself. Panic kicked in like a reflex, but training kept me from losing it completely. I checked my watch. It had stopped at 4:11 p.m. I pulled out my backup flashlight and began heading toward what I thought was the original entry road, planning to hike out and call for backup. But the trees, they weren't the same. What had been a clear trail now twisted and forked in ways I didn't remember. The more I tried to follow landmarks, the more I found things I hadn't passed before. An overturned school bus covered in moss, a rusted swing set in the middle of a clearing, even a single boot nailed to a tree heel first. I marked my path with orange ribbon, standard protocol, but when I doubled back at one point, the ribbons were missing. I hiked for over an hour before reaching another structure. It was a small house, half collapsed, but lights were on inside. Actual lights. I knocked. Nothing. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, there was a fire in the hearth. Warm. Real. On a chair facing it sat a man. Gray beard, flannel shirt, hands folded over his knees. I felt a jolt of relief and asked him if he lived here. He didn't move. I repeated the question, stepping closer. Then he spoke, but his mouth didn't open. "The road out only opens when he blinks," he said. I froze. "Who?" The man tilted his head just slightly. His eyes remained closed. He was blind. Or something else. "If you run now, you'll wake him. But if you sit, he might forget you." I backed away and the man smiled faintly, like he'd just finished a joke no one heard. Behind him on the wall was a framed photo. It was me, wearing the same jacket I had on, standing in front of the church. I hadn't taken it. I don't remember how I got out. Truly, one moment I was in that cabin, staring at my own face in a photo I never posed for, and the next I was stumbling down a two-lane road being pulled into the passenger seat of a park ranger's truck. They found me 30 miles north, dehydrated, wandering barefoot. My shoes were still back in Black Hollow. I had no keys, no ID, just the photo. Somehow, I'd stuffed it into my back pocket. No burn marks, no moisture damage, just a clear shot of me in front of a building that, according to the ranger, had burned down in 2009. They said I'd been missing for 3 days. I was investigated, of course, drug tested, evaluated. The report was sealed, and I was reassigned within the month. All my digital records of that trip were corrupted. SD card blank, GPS logs missing. Only the photo remained. I still have it in a folder at the bottom of a locked drawer, and I haven't looked at it in over a year. Not since the last time I heard that voice. It came through my car radio. Dead static, then the voice, clear as a bell. "The road out only opens when he blinks." I turned the car off and sat in silence for hours. Now every night before bed, I cover every mirror in my house. I unplug every device. I don't go near the woods anymore, not even at the edge of town. Because sometimes when I close my eyes, I see a church I never entered, a pew I never sat in, and someone sitting in my seat. I've worked in Forest Service and land assessment for over a decade, and I've seen plenty of odd things tucked away in the mountains. Forgotten homesteads, makeshift hunting lodges, even old Civil War relics. But I've never felt the kind of dread that I did standing in front of that cabin, half swallowed by the trees, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. I was only supposed to check the property line, take some pictures, and head back down before nightfall. But something or someone wanted me to stay longer. This happened back in the fall of 2019. I was working for a private surveying firm contracted by the state to confirm ownership boundaries in rural Appalachia. specifically in a remote stretch of land on the edge of Clay County, West Virginia. There had been some dispute over an old hunting lease that ran up against state forest territory. The area was known for its spotty records and tangled land grants, and I was sent up alone to map the coordinates and file a report. It was standard protocol. Hike in, verify structures, and check the cabin listed on the assessor's map. That cabin was the only known structure in the area, and it hadn't been recorded as occupied in nearly 15 years. The road in was barely passable. My company truck gave out 2 miles short of the last pin on my GPS. I packed my gear, threw a .38 on my hip, standard precaution up in the mountains, and hiked the rest of the way on foot. The air was cool, and the trees were in full color, fiery reds and burnt orange. But the deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and the occasional crack of twigs behind me, which I kept telling myself was probably a deer. I reached the cabin around 3:40 p.m. It sat in a shallow clearing surrounded by old-growth oak and poplar trees. The structure was in better condition than I expected. Roof intact, windows grimy but not shattered, chimney still standing. It looked lived in. Not recently, but not long abandoned either. I took a few pictures from the outside, then walked the perimeter. Around the back, I found an old clothesline still strung between 2 trees. A faded shirt hung from one side, flapping gently, though there was no wind. That was the first thing that fell off. The second was the set of muddy boot prints near the back steps. Fresh, sunken deep like someone had stood there just hours before. But there hadn't been any cars on the road, and I hadn't passed another soul on the hike up. I knocked on the door. No answer. I announced myself, private land surveyor, state contract, and waited. Still nothing. I pushed the door open slowly. It creaked, but not dramatically, just enough to set my nerves on edge. The inside was quiet, dusty but not wrecked. There was an old stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, a cabinet with canned goods that hadn't exploded from age. A bed sat in the far corner, sheets tucked in. On the nightstand was a journal, handwritten. I shouldn't have read it, but curiosity got the better of me. The entries were dated sporadically between 2004 and 2008. The author, just signed with an R, talked about solitude, hunting, keeping the boundary, and something he called the pact. At first I thought it was religious, but the tone shifted. One entry simply read, "They come to check every fall. Pretend you're not here. Let them leave. Do not answer if they call your name." I froze. There was no electricity in the cabin. No power lines, no generator. Yet just then, I heard the faint sound of a radio, static mixed with what sounded like an old country tune, drifting from the corner of the room. I turned slowly. There was a small radio on a shelf. Not plugged in. Battery panel missing. The static cut out. Then I heard it. A voice. My voice. From the radio. "Private land surveyor, state contract." It repeated, in the exact tone I had spoken it moments earlier. I grabbed my pack and moved to leave, but the front door was shut. I hadn't closed it. The knob wouldn't turn. I pushed hard. It didn't budge. I pulled at the window frame nearby. Nailed shut. I didn't panic yet. I circled to the back exit and tried that door instead. It opened. The forest outside had changed. I stepped out and realized immediately that the sun was gone, completely. It had been mid-afternoon, and now it looked like dusk, maybe even darker. I checked my watch. Dead. I pulled out my compass. It spun in place. I stepped off the porch and felt something soft underfoot. I looked down and saw a sock, dirty, weathered. Nearby, a thermos. Further out, what looked like a torn surveyor's flag. None of it was mine. I scanned the treeline, and that's when I saw him. A man, or the outline of one, standing just beyond the reach of the clearing, half concealed by the trees. Tall, still, watching. I called out, no response. I drew my sidearm and shouted a warning. He stepped back, melting into the forest like smoke. I didn't chase him. I bolted in the opposite direction, trying to find the original trail. But every direction looked the same, twisted trees, thick brush, no markers. I was moving blind. Then ahead of me, I saw another cabin, identical to the one I had just left. I approached it cautiously, hoping it was the same one, and I'd somehow circled back. But the porch creaked differently, and the door was ajar instead of closed. I stepped inside, flashlight drawn. It was the same layout, same fireplace, same table, but there were 3 chairs now, and on the table 3 plates, all with food. Hot food, meat, beans, cornbread, steam rising from each one, though there was no fire in the hearth. I backed out of the cabin, heart slamming against my ribs. That's when I heard footsteps, fast, charging from the woods. I turned toward the sound, weapon raised, but no one emerged, just the trees still and watching. Then I heard the voice again, mine, echoing from inside the cabin. Private land surveyor, state contract. It repeated twice, then another voice, raspier, lower. He said it again, then laughter, high, broken, too close. I ran. I didn't care where. I just sprinted until my legs burned. At some point I tripped, fell, rolled down a slope, and landed hard on gravel. I looked up, and there it was, my truck, parked exactly where I left it. I didn't waste a second. I fumbled the keys out of my pocket, jumped in, and drove until I saw power lines and pavement. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station 30 miles away. I looked like hell, mud-soaked, scraped up, wide-eyed. I filed the report, but left out most of what I'd seen. Just listed the structure as intact, appears abandoned, and marked the coordinates. That was it. I told myself I'd imagine the rest, got dehydrated, lost, stressed. 2 months later, another field tech from a different team went out there. He didn't come back. They found his truck. Door open. Engine off. No tracks. No signs of struggle. Just a pair of muddy boots placed neatly in front of the cabin steps. I never returned to that part of the mountain. I transferred out within the year. Every now and then, I'll get a call from an unknown number. Never leaves a message. When I pick up, there's nothing but static and a faint country tune playing behind it. One time, I swear I heard my own voice whisper through the line. Private land surveyor, state contract. Some people think the scariest thing about the Appalachian Trail is getting lost. Others say it's the bears, the storms, or the steep drops you don't see until it's too late. But they're wrong. The most terrifying part is what you find in the places nobody talks about. Those little pockets of land between the maps, where time doesn't move right and silence means something is watching. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. I came back, but I haven't been the same since. This happened in the spring of 2017. I was working as a regional field investigator for a conservation agency that tracked illegal structures and unsanctioned homesteads near national trails. We weren't law enforcement, but we were often the first ones sent in to confirm reports of squatters, off-grid camps, or environmental damage. It was mostly routine. Take notes, document signs of human activity, file your report, and move on. Most of the time, we found nothing but empty fire pits or an abandoned tarp shelter. But this assignment came with a handwritten note. Region E Redgate Sector. Proceed solo. No civilian alerts. Low communication zone. Redgate wasn't a name I recognized. It wasn't a registered trail section or listed park boundary. But the pinned coordinates placed it somewhere in the woods west of Irwin, Tennessee. Technically adjacent to the Appalachian Trail, but disconnected from it by several ridgelines and a river. The only way in was a 3-hour hike through old forest roads and switchbacks that hadn't been maintained in over a decade. No signal, no radio tower, just a topographical map, a compass, and a satellite phone that only worked in open sky. I left early and parked at a remote trailhead that hadn't seen a car in weeks. The woods felt wet, like the earth itself was sweating. Everything was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when there are no roads, no planes, no other people. I hiked for nearly 4 hours without stopping, following a dry creek bed that snaked up a shallow ridge. Eventually, I reached the pinned location, a flat patch of land choked with wild raspberry bushes and blackened stumps. At first, I thought there was nothing there. Then I saw the fence. It was low and crooked, made from mismatched wood, some of it freshly cut, some of it almost petrified. It enclosed a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across. Inside it sat a tiny one-room structure. Not quite a cabin, not quite a shed. It had a sloped roof of overlapping tin panels, and a single door with a chain latch. No windows, no chimney, just the building, alone, like it had grown from the dirt. I circled it, noting signs of recent activity. The grass had been cut, roughly by hand. There was a trail of boot prints leading around the back, where I found a small fire pit still lined with white ash. Someone had been here within the past day or two. I knocked, identifying myself. No answer. I waited, knocked again. Still nothing. Against better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door. Inside, it was dark. No lights. Just the narrow slit of daylight behind me. The air smelled sour, like wet wood and something faintly metallic. The interior was Spartan. One cot, one stool, a tin basin, a rusted lantern, and in the far corner, a stack of notebooks tied with twine. They looked homemade, cardboard covers, yellowed pages, handwritten entries. I flipped through the first one. The handwriting was neat, careful, but the contents made no sense. The pages were filled with times and dates, all in the early morning hours, followed by brief phrases like, "He circled again," or "Red sky, no moon," or "Still waiting, still watching." One line was repeated on almost every third page. "Don't leave between breaths." I didn't understand it. I kept going, hoping to find a name, an explanation. Instead, I found something worse. In the fourth notebook, about halfway through, I found my own name. Spelled correctly. Dated the day before. Field Agent Carter arrives today. Do not speak. Do not follow. I dropped the notebook like it burned me. I stepped outside and scanned the woods. There was no one. But the air had changed, colder now. Still no wind. Still no birds. Just a hum. Not a noise exactly. More like the pressure in my ears when a storm's about to hit. I decided to mark the structure as active and leave. But the trail I had just walked up was gone. I swear it gone. The creek bed was there, but it twisted differently now, leading downhill instead of up. I tried to follow it anyway, but within 10 minutes, I was standing back in front of the cabin. My tracks, my boot prints, circled the fence twice and then vanished. By now I was panicking. Not visibly, not outwardly, but that kind of panic that settles deep in your gut and makes your fingers twitch. I tried the satellite phone. It powered on. No signal. I held it to the sky, moved to a clearing, still nothing. That's when I heard the knocking. From inside the cabin. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Not loud, just enough. I turned back, staring at the closed door. I hadn't latched it. I'd left it wide open when I left. Now it was shut. I didn't move. My legs wouldn't let me. Then I saw it, through the slits in the tin walls. A figure inside, sitting on the cot, perfectly still. It was me. Same jacket, same backpack, same posture, sitting where I hadn't sat. I took a step back, and the figure did too, matching me beat for beat. I turned and ran. I didn't care where anymore. I ran until my chest burned and my legs went numb. When I stopped, I was back at the fence. But the cabin was gone. Only the fire pit remained, still warm. The footprints had disappeared. The notebooks gone. In their place, a single object sat in the grass. My satellite phone. I picked it up. It was on. Full bars. The time read 2:48 p.m. Exactly 1 minute after I'd first opened the cabin door. I made it back to the truck before sundown. I don't remember the hike. It's like I blinked and I was standing beside it, keys in hand, engine already running. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station and filed the shortest report of my career. No confirmed structure. Area deemed clear. Recommend no follow-up. The ranger didn't ask questions. He just nodded, took the clipboard, and said, "You made it back. That's what counts." I asked him what he meant. He said nothing. That night, I took the satellite phone apart and left the pieces in a riverbed. 2 weeks later, a box showed up at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a notebook, just like the ones from the cabin. The last page read, "You didn't follow." He noticed. Now I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I don't even leave the city unless I absolutely have to. I still have the notebook. It's locked in a case, buried in a closet. But every few months, someone slips something under my door. A photo, a set of coordinates, a hand-drawn map of places that aren't supposed to exist. And sometimes, I get a call from a disconnected number. When I answer, no one speaks, but I can hear my own breath. I work for a private land verification firm based in Asheville. Our job is to handle property assessments for developers, usually mundane stuff like boundary disputes, old utility claims, or tax recovery efforts. It's a quiet line of work unless you're sent into the mountains. This time, the client wanted to purchase what they thought was abandoned land deep in the southwest stretch of Virginia, right along the edge of the Jefferson National Forest. On paper, it was undeveloped forest with no recorded inhabitants, but our client had received an anonymous letter claiming otherwise. The message was brief. The town of Whitlow still stands. Be careful. My manager laughed it off, but sent me anyway. I was to drive up, confirm that there was no town, or that it was just a ghost settlement, and check the GPS coordinates. Standard verification. I'd be in and out the same day. I packed my gear, brought along a drone for aerial footage, and left before sunrise. I didn't bring backup. That was my first mistake. The drive into the hills was smooth at first, long stretches of state highway, then two-lane roads twisting through small valleys. But around noon, my GPS stopped recognizing any named locations. The road narrowed, then turned to gravel, and finally to hard-packed dirt. There were no signs, just trees growing tighter around me, branches brushing against my side mirrors. At one point, I stopped to check the map. I had serviced just long enough to load an overhead satellite image. That's when I saw it, a small grid of streets barely visible beneath a dense tree canopy. A town. Square. Planned. I kept going. After another 10 minutes, I passed a rusted iron sign that read, "Welcome to Whitlow, EST 1891. The letters were hand-carved, but the paint looked fresh. Too fresh. I took a photo and drove in. Whitlow was small, maybe 15 to 20 buildings total. 2 dirt streets ran parallel through the center, lined with old storefronts, a church, a gas station that hadn't pumped fuel in 50 years. But the town wasn't empty. That's what caught me off guard. There were people walking around. Real people. An older man in suspenders sweeping his porch. A group of kids playing marbles by a broken fountain. A woman in a long faded dress carrying a pail of water. They didn't look surprised to see me. They barely looked at me at all, like they knew I was coming. I parked beside what looked like an old general store and got out. The air smelled like damp wood and fire smoke. Not unpleasant, just old. I introduced myself to the man sweeping. He nodded but didn't speak. I asked if this was Whitlow. He nodded again. Is there a mayor or a town clerk I could speak to? He pointed toward the church. That was it. I walked through the town square. Every window I passed had someone behind it, watching from just behind the curtain. No movement. No sound. Just eyes. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. Like I was part of something they were waiting on. I reached the church and stepped inside. It was empty. No pews, no pulpit. Just a single wooden chair in the center, and a spiral of nails hammered into the floor around it, like a symbol. On the back wall, a mural had been painted over in solid black. At the bottom, in tiny red letters, someone had scrawled, "They never left. Don't forget the pact." Behind me, the door shut. Not slammed, just closed. When I turned around, the old man was standing there. This time he spoke. "You're not supposed to be here. I'm just confirming land records," I told him. "I'll be gone in an hour." He stared at me like I hadn't spoken. Then he said, "They remember." "Who remembers?" He didn't answer, just stepped aside and let me leave. I walked back through the town, more aware now of the way everyone moved. Their expressions were empty. Nobody spoke. Nobody seemed to age. I passed the same kids again, in the same spot, playing marbles in the exact same formation. And then I noticed something that froze me in my tracks. One of the kids was mouthing my name. I got back in my car and tried to drive out, but the road didn't look the same. It curved differently. The trees leaned closer. After 10 minutes, I came back to the same rusted Whitlow sign, except this time the paint was older, faded, like it hadn't been touched in years. I kept driving, trying different paths, until I realized I was just looping through the same half-mile again and again. I got out and sent up the drone, hoping to get a view of the area. It launched fine, but after only a minute in the air, the live feed cut out. Just blackness. Not static. Just pitch black. Then the drone returned on its own, descending fast and landing roughly. The camera was cracked. Someone or something had covered the lens with what looked like dried blood. That's when the church bell rang. 1, 2, 3 slow chimes. I turned toward it and saw the townspeople gathering in the square. Silent, all facing the church, all standing perfectly still. My heart was pounding, but I needed to understand what was going on. I grabbed my camera, started filming from behind the store's porch post. A woman emerged from the church. Same dress as before. She held a thick, leather-bound book and began to read, not loudly but rhythmically like a chant. The townspeople didn't repeat her words, but they swayed. In unison, slow and controlled. Then they all turned and looked at me, all at once. I bolted. I didn't go to the car this time. I ran through the back alley and into the trees, hoping I could find the original road on foot. I don't know how long I was running, but eventually I stumbled onto an old trail and followed it down the ridge. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I made it back to my vehicle just after dusk. It was parked exactly where I left it, but it was covered in dust. My bag was inside, but the drone was missing. The timestamp on my dash cam said I'd been gone for 3 days. I drove back to the main highway and reported the incident. My manager didn't believe a word of it, of course. Said I probably got turned around, saw some reenactment town, imagine the rest. I turned in my files, and that was that. Except it wasn't. 2 weeks later, I got a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was the cracked lens from my drone, wrapped in tissue paper. No note. No explanation. I looked up Whitlow again. No record. Not on any map. Not even in old geological surveys. But I still see it. Sometimes, when I drive through certain areas of the Blue Ridge late at night, I'll see a small side road out of the corner of my eye. Unmarked. Just trees and gravel. And sometimes I swear I hear that church bell again, 3 slow chimes. Every now and then, I wake up and find small pebbles on my windowsill. The kind kids used to play marbles. And once, just once, I found a single handprint on the inside of my windshield. Small, like a child's. They remember. And now so do I. This was back in 2021, after COVID wiped out most of my steady gigs. I'd done years of night patrol, construction sites, old shopping plazas, even one off-the-books stint at a racetrack with no power. So when a private firm offered me double the rate to work 3 overnight shifts guarding a decommissioned mining town, I didn't ask too many questions. They called it Briar Hollow. Said it used to be a company town until it dried up in the late 90s. Apparently, vandals had been getting in and scrapping metal from the old buildings. My job was simple: stay in the security trailer, log any activity, and do a walkthrough once per night. No police backup, no radio tower, just me, a flashlight, and a dusty binder of maps. The site was deep in the hills, 2 hours off the main highway, another 40 minutes down a gravel road that wasn't even on my GPS. The company had a small base camp set up with a trailer, some lights, a generator, and a few motion sensors placed along the perimeter. They dropped me off before dusk and promised someone would be back to pick me up after the 3rd shift. Until then, I was alone. The first night started off quiet. I did a quick walkthrough around 10 p.m. The town was surreal, rows of shotgun houses leaning into the wind, a general store with broken windows, a church missing its bell. The mine entrance sat at the base of the hill, sealed with heavy boards and rusted chain. A warning sign was bolted across it, unstable, do not enter. Inside the trailer, I logged the walkthrough and settled in with a thermos of gas station coffee. Around 1 a.m., one of the motion sensors pinged, Zone 3 near the schoolhouse. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was colder than I remembered. Still, no bugs, no wind, just the sound of my boots crunching gravel. I circled the schoolhouse. No sign of anyone, no movement, but the sensor kept blinking. That's when I noticed the front door was open, just a few inches. I'd checked it earlier. It was shut tight. I called out, "Private security." No answer. I pushed the door open. The air inside was heavy. Dust floated through my beam. Rows of old desks still stood, some with carvings in the wood. Names. Doodles. At the front was a chalkboard. Someone had written on it recently, "You're not supposed to stay past the third night." I froze. The chalk was still in the tray. My hand trembled as I lifted it. It was damp, like someone had used it just minutes before. I backed out and returned to the trailer. Logged it. Tried to calm myself. Probably some local messing around. The mines always attracted thrill seekers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. Night 2 was worse. Just before midnight, I heard a metallic clang echo from the mine shaft. It was loud enough to shake the trailer. I ran out, heart pounding, and scanned the entrance. The chain was still there, but looser now, like it had been disturbed. I shined my light down the shaft slats between the boards. Nothing, just darkness and that strange cold air rising from the tunnel like breath. When I turned to go, I noticed something on the ground. A footprint. Bare. Human. Toes curled like whoever it belonged had been standing there, listening. I followed the trail. It led toward the church. The front door was open, swinging slightly. I crept inside. My light caught the back wall, where a large wooden cross used to hang. It had been pulled down. In its place, someone had etched a circle with lines through it, crude but deliberate. On the floor, in front of the altar, lay a pile of coal. Not scattered, stacked, like an offering. The third night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the trailer with the door locked, flashlight in one hand, my other on the handle of the pistol they issued me, but told me I'd never need. Around 2:17 a.m., all the motion sensors triggered at once. Every zone, every direction. Then the lights outside went out. Just a loud click and then pitch black. I stepped outside, trying to keep my breath steady. Fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the buildings whole. My flashlight cut maybe 20 feet through it, and then I saw them. Figures, standing at the edges of the clearing. Dozens of them. Men, women, some tall, others slouched. All completely still. Their clothes were outdated, overalls, flannel, long skirts. Miners, maybe. Families. I couldn't see their faces. They didn't move. I shouted, "This is private property. You need to leave now." No reaction. I backed into the trailer and slammed the door. Locked it. I turned to grab the radio and froze. One of them was already inside. He was sitting in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around them. Pale skin covered in coal dust. Eyes wide open but unfocused. His lips were moving. Third night. They wake on the third night. I raised my gun, but he didn't react. Just whispered it again. They wake. They wake. They wake. The trailer began to shake, lights flickering, metal groaning like the earth itself was angry. Then I heard it, the mine chain snapping. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted through the fog, past the buildings, toward the only thing I could see, the red taillights of a truck. Company transport. They'd come early. I dove into the bed as it began to move, pounding the cab until the driver noticed me. He didn't say a word, just stared ahead. We drove in silence for miles. Once we hit pavement, I asked him who gave the order to pick me up early. He didn't answer, just kept driving. When we finally stopped at the base camp, He handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was my paycheck and a small old photograph. It showed the town of Briar Hollow sometime in the 1930s. Same buildings, same church, and standing in front of the mine entrance was a group of workers. I recognized one of them instantly, the man from the trailer. Same face, same eyes. The photo was dated 1938. I quit the next day. Haven't worked a single night shift since. But sometimes around 2:17 a.m., I still wake up sweating, convinced I'm back in that trailer. Listening, waiting, wondering if I stayed 1 minute too long. And a week ago, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a lump of coal, still warm. The forest doesn't go silent without a reason. I learned that the hard way. When the radio stopped working and the smoke didn't move like normal, I should have called it in. Instead, I stayed in that tower like a damn fool, watching the tree lean for something I still don't have the words to explain. This wasn't a wildfire. It was something pretending to be one, and I was the only man dumb enough to stand guard while it moved. I took the job because I needed solitude. After 10 years in the Army and a messy divorce, the idea of a seasonal post at a fire lookout tower in the Appalachian range sounded perfect. The pay was garbage, but the quiet was priceless. It was just me, the radio, a cot, a pair of binoculars, and miles of forest on all sides. My job was simple: monitor the area for signs of smoke, track weather conditions, and radio anything suspicious back to the ranger base 20 miles east. The tower was built in the 60s, rusted bolts, creaking stairs, and a warped floor that leaned a little more each year. But it stood tall above the tree canopy, with a view that could humble you. My first week was uneventful. Some storms rolled in, a bear wandered close one night, and I spotted a couple of illegal campers far off by the ridge. Nothing serious. The air smelled of pine, the days passed slow, and I started sleeping better than I had in years. It started with the smell. On the morning of July 17th, I woke to a sharp, acrid stench, not the usual campfire whiff or lightning-struck pine. This was chemical. Wrong. I stepped onto the deck and scanned the horizon. Sure enough, a thin column of smoke rose just past Dead Elk Hollow, about 3 miles northwest. I grabbed my radio. Tower 9 to base. I've got visual on possible wildfire. Coordinates incoming. I waited for the static to break, but nothing came. The green LED blinked like it was transmitting, but no voice crackled back. I tried again. Still silence. It wasn't just the base. I couldn't reach the other towers either. Channel after channel, all dead. The emergency satellite phone gave me one beep, and then nothing. No dial tone, no signal bars. I figured maybe a storm knocked something out. That happens sometimes. I jotted down the smoke's direction, grabbed my binoculars, and zoomed in. The fire wasn't spreading. Odd. It just hovered like a pillar, steady and vertical. No flickering at the base, no shifting with the wind. The trees around it didn't even look scorched. Just still. I watched it for hours. Birds flew around it, not away from it. No wildlife stirred in the underbrush. That silence started creeping in around 1 p.m. Even the cicadas shut up. You don't realize how loud the forest is until it stops. That's when I started to feel like I was being watched. That night, I kept the lantern lit and stayed on edge. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement. Not from below, but from the stairs. The tower only had one entrance, one long metal staircase leading up from the forest floor. You can hear every footstep echo all the way up. That night, I heard slow, deliberate steps climbing halfway up and stopping. I called out, "Who's there? You're trespassing." No answer. Just standing. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it down. The steps were empty. I swear on my life, there was no one there. I stayed up till dawn, shotgun in hand, watching the staircase. The smoke was still there the next morning. Same spot. Same shape. No spread. No ash. No smell unless the wind shifted just right. On the second night, I saw a light down near the smoke, like a camp lantern or fire, but blinking. In perfect intervals. Morse code maybe? I tried to decode it, but gave up. It didn't follow any pattern I knew. At one point it blinked so fast it looked like strobe lighting. I decided I'd hike down at first light and investigate. I packed a flare gun, my compass, a day pack, and the shotgun. I left a note on the tower desk, in case someone came looking. Heading northwest toward smoke column. Radio out. Return ETA, 1700. I started down the trail at 6:30 a.m. About an hour in, I realized something was off. There were no birds, no squirrel chatter, no deer tracks. It was like walking through a diorama, trees standing too still, branches unmoving despite the breeze I could feel on my skin. At one point, I checked my compass. The needle spun slowly in a full circle, like it was drunk. By noon, I reached the base of the ridge near Dead Elk Hollow. There was no smoke, nothing burned, no heat, no scorched bark or dry underbrush. Just a perfect circle of forest that felt wrong. I mean that in the deepest, gut-level way. The air smelled like iron and something sweeter, like rotting fruit. My ears popped, like I'd climbed altitude too fast. Then I found the radios. Scattered in the brush, 3 Ranger-issue handhelds. All different channels. All dead. One was covered in rust. Another had blood on it. The last one was perfectly clean, but chirped once when I touched it. Just once. A little tone I'd never heard before. That's when I turned and saw him. A man about 50 yards off, standing with his back to me. He wore a tower uniform, same as mine, but it looked older. Faded patches, buttons missing. His hair was gray and wild, and his hands hung at his sides like dead weights. I shouted to him. He didn't move. I raised my shotgun, not to shoot, just to get his attention, and took a step forward. He turned. His eyes were red, not bloodshot, glowing. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He lifted one hand and pointed behind me. I turned. There was smoke again, rising, maybe 10 feet behind me. Silent. Cold. Curling inwards instead of up. I ran. I don't remember the exact path I took back, but the forest changed. The trees weren't the same ones I passed earlier. They leaned at angles too sharp to be natural. Bark peeled like burned skin. I could hear the tower's stairs creaking, even though I was still miles away. I saw lights again, those blinking strobes between the trees. At one point, I swear I passed a mirror nailed to a tree. It showed the tower, only the tower, like a live feed. I wasn't in it. When I finally stumbled back to the tower clearing, it was night, though my watch said 4:15 p.m. The stairs looked longer than before, stretching impossibly high into the dark. I climbed 2 steps at a time, heart pounding like it would burst. Inside the tower, everything was untouched, my cot, my note, my cold cup of coffee. But the note had changed. It now said, "Don't leave again." I grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired it straight into the sky. Nothing. No echo. No color. The flare disappeared into black. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and sat in the corner till morning. I was found 3 days later by a helicopter patrol. They said the smoke report was never received, that I missed 2 scheduled radio check-ins. They were about to send a search crew when they picked up my emergency beacon. But here's the thing, I never turned on that beacon. It was still tucked away, battery pack uncracked. They said I was dehydrated, delusional. I told them everything. One ranger, an older guy with a silver star pin, pulled me aside after the others had left. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. When I didn't answer, he said, "Tower 7 reported smoke like that back in '83. Guy disappeared. Never found. Same spot you went looking." I quit 2 days later. They wanted a report. I refused. Just packed my stuff, left the keys on the desk, and drove west. I've never set foot in a forest since. Sometimes I wake up at 3:17 a.m., same time I heard the footsteps on the stairs. I swear I hear the creaking again. And when I look out the window, there's always a thin column of smoke rising in the dark. But it's not climbing toward the sky. It's curling toward me. I got the job through a contractor friend who owed me a favor. After leaving a messy construction gig in Kentucky, I was in no shape to argue when he offered me a quiet security post in the mountains. All he said was, "Pays cash, 3 weeks straight, just walk the perimeter. Don't ask questions, man." That should have been a red flag. But I was broke, tired, and numb from a breakup that had drained more than just my bank account. The settlement, named Prosper Hollow, was buried somewhere near the North Carolina-Tennessee line, about 20 miles from the nearest town. I was driven in a blacked-out van with no windows, blindfolded the last 10 miles. They said it was to protect the research site. When the van finally stopped, the guy driving said, "Keep your head down, follow protocol, and you'll be fine." I stepped out into a clearing surrounded by steep ridgelines and thick pine. No signs, no fences, just a narrow gravel road curling out of view. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No cars, no birdsong, not even wind in the trees. Prosper Hollow had about 15 cabins, all built the same, square, gray wood, no house numbers. There was one main lodge, a communications shed with a weather tower, and the gate, which I was responsible for watching from dusk until dawn. My shack sat beside it, barely big enough for a chair, a cot, and a two-way radio that only called the main lodge. The residents rarely left their cabins. When they did, they moved in pairs. No one made eye contact. They wore plain clothes, gray, beige, dark green, and walked with this weird, synchronized rhythm, like they were practicing some silent drill. I figured maybe they were military researchers. Maybe cult people. Either way, I didn't poke around. One night, about a week in, I heard something over the radio. Not static, not voices, breathing. Slow, deep, rhythmic. I answered with the call code. Gate 1 reporting. "Do you read?" No reply. The breathing just faded out. Next morning, the radio was gone. Literally gone. The whole unit was missing from the desk in my shack. I reported it to the head of security, a guy named Vernon who looked like a preacher, but had the coldest eyes I've ever seen. He said, "Must be a mistake. You probably moved it and forgot." Then he handed me a new unit, same model, and walked off without another word. I tried to keep my head down after that, but things kept getting weirder. At night, I'd see people walking the perimeter from my shack. Only when I stepped out to check, they'd vanish. No footprints. No motion lights tripped. Just cold air and that gut feeling that you're being watched from the trees. On the 12th night, I watched 2 residents, man and woman, walk from their cabin toward the woods past the no entry sign. They weren't supposed to leave the inner grounds, but no alarms went off. I followed from a distance, staying in the shadows, boots crunching softer than I liked on the gravel path. They stopped at a clearing near a stone marker, something old, moss-covered, about shoulder height. The man knelt beside it. The woman whispered something and lifted a wooden bowl from her coat. I couldn't hear what they said, but she poured something dark, thick, into the bowl and set it on the stone. Then they both stood still, heads bowed, for a solid 5 minutes. When they turned to leave, I ducked low, heart hammering. As they passed, I swear they were smiling, but not like normal people. Their smiles were wide, stretched too long, like they were forcing it. The man mumbled, "It'll come soon," and the woman nodded. I didn't report it. That same night, just past 3 a.m., I heard knocking from under the floor of my shack. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I jumped up, flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other. The shack had no basement. It sat on cinder blocks. I stepped outside and aimed my light underneath. Empty, but the air was warm, like something had just been breathing there. And my boots, when I came back in, they were damp, like I'd walked through a mist I hadn't seen. The next morning, 4 cabins were marked with red chalk on their doors. No one left them all day. That night, the lights in those cabins didn't come on. I asked Vernon about it. "Quarantine," he said flatly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But when I checked the logs for resident movements, because part of my job was tracking who came and went, the names from those cabins were removed. Not crossed out, erased, as if they never existed. On the 16th night, everything unraveled. It started with the gate opening on its own. The steel bar lifted without the keypad being touched, and no one was scheduled for entry or exit. I called it in, no response. The whole comms network was dead. Then I saw the fog roll in. But it wasn't like normal fog. It moved too fast, too low. It hugged the ground like it had weight to it, spilling between cabins and swallowing the lodge whole. Lights flickered. The power died. And then the chanting began. Soft at first. A low, rhythmic murmur that didn't match any language I recognized. I stepped out with my flashlight, trying to make sense of the noise, and that's when I saw them, all the residents, standing in a circle around the stone marker in the woods. They were swaying. One by one, they were cutting their palms and dripping blood into that same wooden bowl I'd seen before. The bowl was overflowing, and the blood didn't drip down. It seemed to sink upward into the air. The fog started to twist into shapes, tall, narrow silhouettes like stretched human forms. Not walking, not crawling, gliding. The chanting grew louder, and my head started to ring like my skull was vibrating from the inside. I turned to run, but Vernon was behind me. "You should have stayed in the shack," he whispered. He held a flare gun, pointed at my chest. "You weren't chosen, but now you've seen too much." I backed away slowly. Then something in the fog, grabbed Vernon's shoulder from behind. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just went limp, eyes wide, mouth open, like he saw something he recognized. And then he was gone. Just gone. The flare gun hit the dirt. I ran. I don't know how long I ran through the woods. I only know I didn't stop until I saw headlights. A trucker found me wandering the gravel road at dawn, clothes torn, face streaked with blood that wasn't mine. He drove me to the nearest ranger station, where I told them everything. They called state police. The official report? No record of a place called Prosper Hollow. No signs of construction or human habitation in the area. I showed them where the gravel road was. It wasn't there anymore. Just thick woods and a dead-end trail choked with underbrush. I gave them the flare gun as proof. It was gone from my pack. My boots were soaked in blood when they logged my belongings. Lab said it was inconclusive origin. That was their way of saying it wasn't just animal blood. Maybe not human either. They kept me in observation for 3 days. Suggested I was dehydrated, delusional, that I probably got turned around during a panic episode and imagined the rest. But one ranger, older guy with a limp, pulled me aside the morning I was discharged. "You're not the first one to come out of those woods saying something like that," he said. "And you won't be the last, but you are the first to make it out walking." I left the state that night. I don't take jobs without full addresses anymore. No blindfolds. No remote gigs. But some nights, always around 3:17 a.m., I wake up choking on the smell of iron and wet pine. Once, I walked out onto my porch in Ohio. There was a mark on the step. Red chalk. And in the distance, just at the edge of the trees behind my house, I saw 2 people, standing perfectly still, smiling just a little too wide. Some counties in Appalachia feel like time just forgot them. I was stationed in one for a temporary security contract, meant to last only 3 weeks. No police department, no cell service, and a local government that operated out of an abandoned post office. They said I was just there to watch the roads. But what I really witnessed was something the locals never dared to speak of, and something I still can't explain. I took a contract job through a private firm that usually handled industrial surveillance. Nothing fancy, some factories, some remote infrastructure. This one was different. The brief was vague: rural coverage, minimum contact, eyes on major road points for asset protection. I was told it was in a small Appalachian county with a declining population and high transient activity. They didn't name the town in the paperwork, just coordinates, a start date, and a warning that locals may be sensitive. The area was remote, so far up in the hills that even GPS had trouble placing me. I drove 6 hours from Roanoke, only to be met at a gravel junction by a man in a county utility truck. He wore no name tag and didn't speak until we reached the old visitor center where I'd be stationed. "You stay in the booth. You see anyone take the Southern Ridge Road, you radio us." "That's it," he said, handing me an old 2-way and a laminated map with most of the roads marked in pencil. He didn't even wait for questions before driving off. The first week was mostly boring. Long hours in a cold shack with spotty power and an AM radio that picked up more static than music. A logging road ran north, while the so-called Southern Ridge Road veered off and dipped behind a tree line so dense it swallowed headlights after 50 feet. My job was to write down vehicle descriptions and times, and only report if someone used the Ridge Road. The locals, when I saw them, never did. Most passed by in silence. Some slowed down and stared at me without waving. On day 5, a man on foot came up the Ridge Road. That alone was unusual. No one walked around here. He had on a long coat, carried a satchel, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes locked on the booth as he approached. I stepped out, hand resting near my sidearm, but he didn't speak. Just reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a worn photograph. It was a picture of a child, faded and creased. He went up there, 5 years ago. I know you won't stop them, but don't help them either, he muttered, pointing toward the ridge. They won't kill you unless you make noise. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back into the woods, not back toward town, but deeper into the tree line. That night, I reviewed the map again. The Ridge Road had no name, no house markers, no utilities. I tried calling base. Static. The signal had started dropping in and out around sundown every day, but now it was completely gone. Around midnight, I saw headlights. An old sedan came crawling down the Ridge Road, its front bumper missing and the hood covered in what looked like ash. The driver never looked up as they passed. Just pale knuckles on the wheel and a blank face, like they were hypnotized. I went to write the plate down, but there was no plate, just mud and rust. That same car passed by again an hour later. Same speed, same silence, same dirt-covered windows. I checked the log from earlier. It had passed the same direction, not returning. But this time, when it passed, the interior light was on, and I saw the back seat. There was something in it. Not a person, not an animal. Something wrapped in a gray sheet that moved just slightly as the car passed. Like breathing. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of week 2, I began to notice other things. Birds would go silent an hour before dusk. I'd find fresh boot prints circling the booth each morning, even when I hadn't seen a soul. At one point, I spotted an old utility pole down the road covered in wire bundles that led nowhere, just coiled into the trees like someone had strung them up for show. Then the truck came. An unmarked black pickup rolled down the Ridge Road during a heavy rain. 3 men inside, sunglasses, no plates again, military posture. They stopped at the booth, but didn't roll down the window. Just stared. I stepped out. One in the passenger seat cracked the window just enough to speak. If you hear anything after midnight, you stay in this booth. No matter what. They drove off. Later that night, I did hear something. It started as low, slow rumbling like thunder that never stopped. Then came the metallic noises, clanging, dragging, like something was pulling chains through the woods. At 2:12 a.m. exactly, the booth lights shut off completely. No wind, no power, no noise from the woods. Just the low electric hum you feel more than hear. Then a knock. Not on the booth door, but on the back wall. 3 short knocks. When I spun around, there was no one there. Then the radio crackled on, just static, and through it, one word repeated in a distorted voice. Return. I lost track of time. At some point, I opened the booth door. I know I wasn't supposed to, but the static had stopped, and the air was thick with something that smelled like burnt soil and copper. The Ridge Road was glowing faintly, just the dirt itself, a dim orange pulse like it was alive. And in the distance, I saw them. Figures walking single file down the road. Maybe 12, maybe more. All barefoot, moving slow, heads tilted up like they were being guided by something above the trees. Their eyes reflected light like animals. And one of them, the last in line, turned to look directly at me. He raised his hand and motioned. Not to come, but to watch. I closed the door and backed into the booth until my spine hit the far wall. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The figures walked past the booth, never breaking formation, never looking again. Except the last one. He paused just beside the booth window. It was the same man who'd shown me the photograph. But now his coat was gone, and his skin looked changed. Paler, paper thin. He pressed a hand to the glass, nodded once, and then followed the others into the woods. I was picked up the next morning by a new driver. He said nothing. The company sent me a check and an NDA. The booth, I later learned, was dismantled. The Ridge Road, no longer on any map. Satellite view shows dense trees where I know the road existed. A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was the photo of the child that man had shown me, and a note that said, "Returned, but not the same." I called the number the firm had used to reach me. Disconnected. I've searched every database I could for anything about the county, the Ridge Road, or even the logging company I was supposedly securing. Nothing exists. Even the pay stubs vanished from my records. I still have that photo, and some nights, especially when the wind shifts just right, I hear the clinking of metal outside. I've moved twice since then. I don't tell this story often. When I do, people just assume I hallucinated it all. But I'll leave you with this. 2 months ago, someone rang my doorbell in the middle of the night. When I checked the camera, no one was there, but taped to my front door was a new map, the same hand-drawn lines, and a red mark right beside the Ridge Road. This time it was circled twice. Back in 2019, I was between jobs and low on money. A buddy from my Army Reserve unit ed me up with a gig through a subcontractor for the Department of the Interior. The listing was vague. Overnight perimeter security for forest conservation site, no cell signal, must be self-reliant. The pay was decent, and the isolation sounded like a break from the mess my life had become. I said yes without asking enough questions. The job site was in the thick of southern Appalachia, North Georgia line, not far from where Tennessee and North Carolina meet. I was stationed in a ranger shack about 30 miles from the nearest paved road. They flew me in by chopper and dropped me with supplies for 2 weeks. My job was simple: patrol the trails around a marked perimeter, report any fire signs, track wildlife interference, and never cross the old fence line that ran through the northern edge of the zone. Do not enter the restricted boundary under any circumstances, the supervisor repeated. Stay in your sector. Stay alert. Stay quiet. The first few nights were dead quiet. I did 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. loops on foot, logging trail conditions and tagging motion alerts from the field cams. The woods were dense and unlit, and I used a red lens headlamp to avoid spooking animals. Once in a while, I'd catch a flash of deer eyes or hear an owl calling somewhere beyond the ridge. But by day 4, things started to feel wrong. The forest got quieter. The usual nighttime noise, frogs, crickets, even the wind, faded, like the woods were holding their breath. I started finding strange markings along the trail, stone stacks and hanging bundles of feathers, dirt smudged with what looked like ash or charcoal. One night, I spotted an animal carcass, small, maybe a raccoon or a fox, laid out in the middle of the trail. No blood, no bite marks, just laid down, perfectly still, with its eyes wide open. I radioed it in. Silence. My comms had gone out sometime after midnight. I checked the weather antenna, green light. Power was fine, but no response from base. I doubled my patrol radius. That's when I found it. An old firewatch tower, off the map and hidden past a line of fallen trees. The wood was rotting, but the stairs held. I climbed to the top and found a journal, soaked in mildew, pages warped but readable. It was filled with entries from someone named J. Webb, dated from 1998. One entry read, "Night 12, saw them again. Always after the wind dies. They line up near the fence like they're waiting for someone to let them in. I tried warning the replacement guy, but they don't tell us the whole story. No one ever finishes their term out here." I heard something snap below. I ducked low and looked out. There were people, maybe 5 or 6, standing just at the tree line. No flashlights, no movement, just standing. They weren't dressed like hikers, just gray, earth-colored clothes, stiff posture, no visible faces in the dark. I didn't move. After 10 minutes, they turned and walked back into the trees, each one in a different direction. I stayed in the tower until daylight. The next day, the journal was gone. The pages I'd left open were ripped out. But the strangest thing? The trail cams from the night before showed nothing. No figures. Not even me in the tower. On night 9, something changed. The boundary fence, rusted, sagging, was down. Like something had torn through. Not cut, not knocked, ripped like the posts had been twisted from the earth. I radioed again. Still nothing. I flagged it with tape and moved back toward the shack. That's when I saw the lights. Tiny flickers, like lanterns or torches, weaving slowly through the woods on the other side of the fallen fence. I followed them, not close, just enough to track the direction. They formed a circle. I could hear whispering. Low, not English. Rhythmic, almost like a prayer. Then a scream. Short. Guttural. Human. I froze. The lights winked out. Suddenly, I was alone again. I bolted back to the shack. Inside, the lights were already on. The door was open. Inside, on my desk, was a photograph that hadn't been there before. It was a black and white image, maybe from the 70s. A group of rangers standing beside a sign that read, Boundary Group, Personnel Rotation Number 7. One of the men was me. Same face. Same scar under the lip. Same crooked nose. Except I hadn't been born yet when that photo was taken. I grabbed my pack and gear. I didn't care about protocol. I wasn't going to wait until something else showed up. I made for the emergency trailhead 6 miles south. No radio. No help. Just me and a dull ache in my spine like something was pressing down on me the whole hike. I made it to a ranger station by morning, barefoot and bleeding, my boots lost somewhere in the river crossing. They took me to a clinic and patched me up. I told them everything. One of the older rangers just nodded, expression tight. That shack was closed down in 2006, he said. That area's off limits now. Too unstable. I showed them the photo. They took it and never gave it back. 2 men in suits showed up that afternoon. Didn't give names. Asked me about hallucinations. Offered a transition bonus if I agreed to sign some paperwork. I signed. They gave me a check and a warning not to return. I didn't, but it's followed me anyway. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a page from J. Webb's journal. It read, Some men don't get taken. Some are sent back, but they're not always the same. Watch the eyes. It's always the eyes. Now some nights, when I look in the mirror just before bed, my reflection lags. Not for long, just half a second, but long enough that I've stopped keeping mirrors in the house. Long enough that I never sleep more than a few hours at a time. And long enough that when I go out to the edge of my property, far from the lights, and listen real close, I hear the whispering again. Low, rhythmic, and calling my name.